Good morning, everyone. Good morning. We have been walking in wisdom, going through the Proverbs this summer, each week on a different topic, a different theme within the Proverbs. And as I meditated or prepared for this week's topic, I was really hit this morning. I stand before you a convicted man, not in that way, like convicted, personally convicted, and a conflicted man, and I'll tell you why. See, I have this thing that I do. I've got two pets. I've got a cat, Rosie, dog, Heidi, and like all pets, they get those little mats in their fur. You know what I'm talking about? The fur kind of clumps together for some reason, and I'm sure it's uncomfortable for them to a certain extent. And what you're supposed to do is brush it out. But I've got a certain skill. I've got a skill. So when I see that they have these mats, I feel like I'm pretty good at just sort of teasing them apart with my hands. I don't always have a brush, but sometimes I just see it and it's like, okay, I can help you with that. And you pull it apart, and I think I'm pretty good at this. You got to do it carefully, sensitively. You don't want to pull. You don't want to hurt the animal. But I admit, sometimes the animals give a little yip or they pull, and you're like, okay, I gotta stop. But then, a couple seconds later, it's right there. Let me just go back at it again, and it's almost like a little thing that I like to do, and maybe I'm not as good at it as I like to think, but there's this particular spot where my dog gets these mats. It's in a sensitive area, it's right behind the ears. That's where the mats come. And, I like to pick them apart. I like to be very careful, but it doesn't always go well. This morning, getting ready to leave for church, trying to help the dog out here, and the dog's getting a little agitated, and okay, I gotta stop. And why do I tell you this? Well, a couple Christmases ago, I received this lovely devotional in the book of Proverbs by Tim Keller. I really recommend it. And maybe we'll just have a little devotional time here. Get out your cup of coffee, find a quiet moment, and open up the devotional. And Proverbs 26:17 for July 28th. Today's proverb here. Like one who grabs a stray dog by the ears is someone who rushes into a quarrel not their own. And that's today's proverb. And I only realized this morning as I was getting ready to the church, that's me. That's me. It is not a good idea to grab a dog by the ears. They'll bite you. The topic today is conflict, personal conflict and strife. And I chose this topic out of the 8 or so, not because I'm good at conflict, not because I've taken any conflict resolution classes, but because I don't like it. I'm not good at conflict. I don't like confronting people, being in opposition. I enjoy standing right in the middle, not always as a mediator, but just standing in the middle, neutral party, a peacekeeper, even if it means I'm compromising myself, to be honest. I don't like to take sides, and if I do, I take both sides. I can be a little bit of a pushover sometimes. I have a hard time asserting myself, and maybe self-protection. I don't want to get hurt. Don't grab a dog by the ears. Conflicts hurt. We see in another proverb, chapter 30, verse 33. For as churning cream produces butter, and as twisting the nose, that's quite the image, produces blood, so stirring up anger produces strife. It hurts. We all know the pain of conflict. When you're in conflict with somebody, you feel the tension in the air. It makes the relationship difficult. Certainly if there's tension in your home, it's like a heavy weight on your body, on your mind, and your heart, and you just wish the conflict was over. Home is supposed to be a place of peace, but conflict so often comes into every space. Proverbs 17:1 says, better a dry crust, better some dry, bland bread with no butter, with peace and quiet, than a house full of feasting with strife. And if you've been there, you know it. You'd rather just eat bread in a peaceful home than have a gourmet buffet with tension, the people across the table from you. Many conflicts are small and you get over them, maybe little arguments over fairness, the right way of doing things, who gets their way. Small conflicts, there's many. We probably all can think of one that happened this morning, but no matter how small they are, they still leave their mark on us. We can still walk away with our minds maybe spinning, our feelings hurt, thinking of plans to sort of make things right or a sharp remark. See, conflict always stings, big or small. It always stings. But sometimes conflict can ruin lives. Sometimes conflict can ruin your life. And I say this, I think I was approaching this topic somewhat lightly, thinking of more petty arguments, but recently coming across stories of people where conflict really has just brought disaster into their life. A conflict maybe with a spouse or with a child, and you know the stories of estrangement and divorce, and the world has these conflicts, personal conflicts, and we see it. It can ruin your life. Not that you can't bounce back from it, not that you can't make your way through, or that peace and God can come through in some way, but we know the stories. Conflict can ruin your life. Proverbs even says in 9:18, those who pause to listen to Lady Folly, they do not know that death is the next stop, that her guests are walking cadavers. Conflict brings death into our lives. Conflict, when we're in strong conflict with somebody, it can just kill us inside, particularly if you're like most people, you don't like conflict, or maybe you're extra sensitive, and when you're in conflict with somebody, you just feel it so heavily, it eats away at you. Of course, all through history, the world's stories, littered with conflicts big, and small. Conflicts come to a head until people literally lose their head. Conflict is the human story. There's always conflict in the news, whether that be international, national, federal, provincial, in our home, in our neighborhood. Conflict is the human story. It's certainly what we see in the early pages of Genesis. God has a dream for the world, so it's filled with his beauty and abundance and generosity, and he casts a vision to his human partners. He says, help me bring this about. Keep the dream alive. But conflict arises when people begin to distrust God, and soon the relationships are shattered and broken, and distrust and conflict becomes the norm. Relationships between people, between genders, between races, countries, families, within families, the relationship is now broken between people and God, between people and creation, between people and their own selves. We're filled with shame. There's conflict everywhere. And not only that, but conflict tends to grow. Conflict begets more conflict, bigger and bigger. Just between Genesis 3 and 9, conflict escalates. There's a downward spiral. It engulfs the whole planet. And people are trading everything good for everything bad. And there are consequences. There's consequences to the conflicts that we enter. Proverbs speaks of this in chapter 17. Evil will never leave the house of one who pays back evil for good. Starting a quarrel is like breaching a dam. So drop the matter before a dispute breaks out. When the cycle of violence is allowed to spiral on, it's like removing a dam and watching the water flow out and flood everything. That's not good. It brings more than you can predict or control. Conflict is the human story. The dam has been breached. One small thing leads to a bigger thing, leads to a bigger thing. An eye for an eye leaves the whole world blind. And the dream is lost at so many points in the biblical story. God doesn't give up on trying to bring that dream back. The dream of a world with no conflict, of wholeness. Again and again, the call for us is to live in a way that matches God's character. We're made in his image, so we can choose to live a life that matches it. That means love, forgiveness, generosity, patience, gentleness, peacemaking, the fruits of the Spirit. And that's where the Proverbs come in. They're not simply little snippets of good advice, though they are. They're divine strategies for living out God's character, for making the world new, bringing back the dream. We're invited to meditate on these day after day, and then actually do them so that we become transformed people, so that we can partner with God in bringing the dream back, restore the world to the way it's meant to be. And remember, the Proverbs are not promises. Paul talked about that. They're not life hacks, or they're not magic shortcuts to get what you want. Life remains messy and unpredictable, and people will not always react to your wise conflict resolution in the ways that you expect. You can be exactly the kind of person that Proverbs tells you to be, and it might still not work out. I mean, that's why there's conflict in the first place. Different people are different. So I'm going to share some Proverbs about conflict with you. Please know, life is still complicated. Some of these almost sound trite. That's too simple to be true. That doesn't apply to me. My situation is more complicated than that. That's never going to work. It's often how we feel. I feel that in me bristling up as I read some of these Proverbs that just seem all too black and white. Well, maybe so. Maybe they don't fit every situation. But if you feel the tension in yourself as you read these and you're like, not so sure that's going to work for me, no, there's always something you can still learn. Because really, the invitation is not just do the right thing, but it's to allow yourself to be changed into a new person. That's something we could all use a little help with. There are four major points, four major pieces of advice I think the Proverbs are giving us when it comes to conflict. The first one, point number one, don't start conflict unnecessarily. Don't start conflict unnecessarily. Listen, there are some conflicts that sure seem necessary in our life. I will acknowledge that. Sometimes it's best to confront people. Sometimes you got to stand up for yourself. Sometimes you are fighting for the cause of justice, and that's going to bring opposition. But there's a lot of conflict that doesn't need to happen. But it still does because of why? Your ego, my ego, our desires for power, money, sex, our hurt feelings. We just gotta make things right, by that sharp remark. Our irrational brains, they immediately respond with thoughts of revenge when we're hurt. We read just before how starting a quarrel is like breaching a dam. So, what's the advice? Drop the matter. Drop the matter before a conflict breaks out. Again, usually conflicts are quite small. Someone makes a small comment, it touches a nerve, and you bite back with a sharp reply, and suddenly you're both aware that, okay, there's a little bit of conflict right here. And I can catch myself making these sharp replies all the time, and I think, why did I have to say that? Why did I have to respond that way? I just made this a thing, and now we need to talk through this, and it's going to take hours. And how different the world would be if we just learned to hold our tongue and not respond sharply to each other and not enter the conflicts we don't need to enter. Entering conflict should be a last resort, especially if the conflict is not yours to begin with. It's very tempting to notice other people having a conflict and to say, okay, I have the answer for this. Let me just step in. You are clearly wrong. They are clearly right. Take sides. But when you rush into a quarrel that's not your own, it's like grabbing a dog by the ear. You're going to get bit. Sometimes you just need to stay out of it. Often you need to stay out of it. There are some people, however, and I'm pointing the finger at myself, that just can't. It's sometimes very hard to stay out of conflict. Look at this one, Proverbs 17:19. Whoever loves a quarrel loves sin. Whoever builds a high gate invites destruction. Well, this is a very direct statement. I mean, many of us do feel naturally argumentative. We like to push back against people. It's fun, maybe, all in good fun. I don't mean to hurt anybody's feelings. The thrill of the debate, right? Well, listen, sometimes the time is right for a healthy and vigorous debate, but I don't think that's what this is referring to. Don't love an argument, especially if it becomes personal or it's clearly having a negative impact on somebody. It's usually not all in just good fun. Don't take too much pleasure in countering people, in being oppositional, especially if what you're talking about, listen, it's not that important. It's not essential. This proverb that we saw, whoever loves a quarrel loves sin. It's disturbingly straightforward. If you love sin, you are embracing destruction of a relationship, and you're tearing down people made in the image of God. It's like when you build a high gate to sort of distance yourself from people. It's not right, and it's not going to end well. One thing that should keep us from entering conflicts too hastily is the understanding that you probably don't have all the facts. We often want to enter into something because we think we know right. Maybe we're an expert in the area. Oh, I've been through this before. I can tell you how it should go down. But listen, often you don't have all the information. Proverbs 18-17 says, in a lawsuit, the first person to speak seems right until someone comes forward and cross-examines. Keep an open mind. You never have all the facts. Hear both sides. If you only hear one, you might jump to conclusions. This next one is not just about what other people are saying. It's about if you've witnessed something, maybe you see something and say, oh, I got to bring this up. I got to make this a thing. What you've seen with your eyes, this is the next proverb, 25:7. What you've seen with your eyes, don't bring hastily to court. Maybe you see something, immediately the accusations need to come. This person has done wrong, I'm going to make a big deal of it. That says what you've seen with your eyes, don't bring hastily to court. Take a moment to consider all the facts. Maybe you're missing some context. Don't jump to conclusions. Point number 1, don't enter conflict unnecessarily. Take a moment, pause, and reflect. Point number 2 that we see in the Proverbs, and again, this is all about how we can live a life that matches God's character. Point number 2, avoid retaliation. Avoid retaliation. Remember, these Proverbs are mostly about personal relationships here. Proverbs 20:22. Don't say, I'll pay you back for this wrong. Wait for the Lord, and He will avenge you. Don't say, I'll pay you back for this wrong. It's so tempting to pay people back, to take revenge into our own hands. I can make this right. I know just the punishment that will fit the crime. Notice this proverb is not just telling you what you shouldn't do. I know we don't have it up, but it's Proverbs 20. Oh, there it is, Proverbs 20:22. It's not just something negative. It's not, don't just say this. Don't just not say this. There's something positive here. Wait for the Lord. Hold on to the certainty that God will deal with it. To be Savior and Judge, He's the one to leave it up to. This is not about a legal matter where the courts or the law is involved. This is about personal relationship. Wait for the Lord, and He will avenge you. I think God's way of dealing with these things is often just the natural consequences of people's bad decisions. To understand that God will deal with it, that helps me be patient. That's the answer to my selfish haste of jumping in and seeking revenge. Whatever God does is up to Him. It's not ours to examine or to decide. When we have these thoughts of revenge, maybe they're small, just a glimmer of a thought that comes in your mind, we are to deliberately refuse the thought. Do not say, I'll pay you back for this wrong. Deliberately refuse the thought. As it says in the New Testament, take every thought captive. Don't let that thought have control. Be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Think on the things that are praiseworthy and noble and true. Deliberately refuse the thought of revenge. It is a positive thing, not just a negative thing. What else are we to positively do about conflict? We've said what you don't do, but what else are we supposed to actually do? Point 2 was avoid retaliation. Now we are to exercise forgiveness and patience. I know it all seems so deceptively simple almost. And we can bristle sometimes at the thought of forgiveness because sometimes the wrongs out there in the world, the things done against us, are so bad. Forgiveness is challenging. And I just feel the hesitation in my own spirit when I think I should encourage someone to forgiveness because I think, well, but what they've gone through is just so terrible. Proverbs 15:18. A hot-tempered person stirs up conflict, but the one who is patient calms a quarrel. There are some topics, certainly maybe in our Canadian context, that are likely to bring conflict. You can think of them. Certainly in other places of the world, these are even more hot issues. Religion, politics, sports, you name it. In Canada, we are a little bit afraid of conflict. In other cultures, they're more happy to embrace sort of that debate, that conversation. But it doesn't matter so much what you're talking about. If you look at that proverb, what is it that stirs up conflict? Proverbs 15:18, you can go back to that. It's a hot-tempered person who stirs up conflict. Quarrels and arguments depend far more on the people than on the subject matter. And we are to be slow to anger. That is a core quality of God that is mentioned again and again and again. We are to be slow to anger, even if we're dealing with a hot-tempered person. Proverbs 19:11, a person's wisdom yields patience. It's to one's glory to overlook an offense, to overlook it. And listen, I know what this sounds like. If you are gravely offended, what does that actually mean for you to overlook it? I don't have simple answers here. But the truth is that the calling that we're given is high. It is high. It's to forgive people. I have a hard time, honestly, articulating exactly what forgiveness really is. But I think, if I can say this, it's to refuse to hold people liable in your heart for what they've done to you, to refuse to hold on to that residual resentment, and to make the commitment not to pay them back, but actually to bear that cost yourself. You choose not to replay those memories in your head, because sometimes we replay the memories of being hurt so we can keep that sense of hurt and loss fresh in our minds. And we feel good about ourselves and virtuous. I'm the victim, and we sort of feel a little bit almost, I don't know, there's a power sometimes that comes with certain thoughts, and we're told not to replay those thoughts in our mind, to release it. Don't hold on to the resentment. If you overlook an offense, or if you forgive someone, it doesn't mean you're a pushover. It doesn't mean that people are going to get away with what they've done. There's other means of dealing with this. But it might, to the outside, look like you're being a pushover. It might look, on the outside, that people are getting away with things. And that's where I see the Proverbs intersecting with the wisdom of Jesus. His most famous teaching on conflict was about how to get slapped. And maybe if I was speaking to a different crowd, I would invite anyone to come up here and have a little demonstration, but I'm not going to do this, and you'll just have to use your imagination. Jesus said, when someone hits you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also. And here, imagine you're slapping me. Just imagine it once. Don't make it a big thing. You have to imagine you're using your right hand. That's the hand in their culture that they would be speaking about. Imagine you slap me on the right cheek with your right hand. And how are you doing it? It's a backhand. All right, you can picture it. Right hand, right cheek. It's a backhand. The backhand slap was a slap in that time used to shame somebody, used to assert your dominance over them, used to show that I am superior, perhaps in class, to you, and I am putting you in your place. I am better than you. I am dominating you. It's something a superior did to an inferior, a backhand slap. And Jesus says, when someone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also. Now imagine, with your right hand, you are slapping me on my left cheek. And how are you doing it? I don't see anyone. I see a few people using their hands here. Now that's a front hand slap. You see the hand has gone like this, and now it's like this. A front hand slap has a different cultural purpose in Jesus' time. That's how you slap someone who's an equal. Jesus says you are to turn your cheek and to invite them to slap you like an equal. This is actually not fighting advice. Let me be clear. There are many situations where this might not literally apply. Jesus is talking about how to resist conflict. Actively, creatively, and non-violently. What happens when I turn the other cheek and I say, you can slap me again, but this time, no, I'm actually your equal. And we are together on this. I am the same as you. I also have the dignity that you have. I am loved just like you are. I am made in the image of God just like you are. And if you're going to slap me, at least acknowledge who I am. That's a powerful thing to do. And there's all sorts of ways that we can creatively take this principle and apply it in conflict. When you are hurt, how can you choose to avoid retaliation, but to still resist and change the dynamic? To make that person maybe do a little bit of soul searching and realize that this is not the battle they need to be fighting right now. Jesus was a wise man. Point number 4, the last one that I see the Proverbs making. In moments of personal conflict, you are to respond in love and to seek reconciliation. Again, I know how this sounds to some. There are many times in our messy world where reconciling with somebody who has hurt us is rightly unwise. An abuser, for example, comes to mind. This doesn't neglect the fact that in almost all circumstances, we are to seek reconciliation. Because that's what God does, and that's who God is. We're to seek reconciliation and work actively to bring peace. Proverbs 12:20. Deceit is in the heart of those who plot evil, but those who promote peace have joy. So this proverb is about the plans that we make. You can plan, you can plot evil, or you can plot peace. You can live in a way that actually tries to bring about peace. You make those kinds of plans, and the plans will actually then make you. You make plans for evil, you'll be shaped by that evil. You make plans for peace, you'll have joy. Seeking the peace of another, as hard as it is, actually brings joy to yourself. It's a paradox. It's complicated, but there's something here. Jesus' second most famous teaching on peace, perhaps? Blessed are the peacemakers, because they will be called children of God. Peace is not just the absence of conflict. When there's no conflict, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have peace, at least in the biblical sense of the word peace, even though that's maybe what peace means to us in English. Peace is the presence, not absence, it's the presence of wholeness, of shalom, of goodness and right relationships. That's what peace is. And we're supposed to promote it, to actively be peacemakers, make that peace, bring that unity. And how do we bring peace in conflict? How do we bring wholeness when there's so much brokenness? Proverbs 17:9 gives us an idea. Whoever would foster love, it means create an atmosphere of love, covers over an offense. But whoever repeats the matter, as in brings up that old hurt, separates close friends. Foster love. What can you do to make that atmosphere where it doesn't exist? What can you do to actually try to be friends with the people that hurt you? I understand it's complicated, but there's some divine wisdom here. When you forgive, and that's a process, it may take a lifetime, and there may be 2 steps forward and 1 step back, but forgiveness is also a process of removing that resentment so that you can honestly be close to people again. You can speak honestly to them. Instead of repeating the matter, bringing up those old hurts that just tears people apart. Love your enemy and pray for those who persecute you. Jesus' divine wisdom, again, in the Proverbs. The last proverb to bring up is one of my favorites because I just don't understand it. Proverbs 25:21. If your enemy is hungry, give him food to eat. If he's thirsty, give him water to drink. In doing this, you will heap burning coals on his head, and the Lord will reward you. What is this referring to? I do not pretend to understand. It's certainly not like, oh, how I'm gonna get my vengeance. I'm gonna be so nice, he's gonna hate it. It's a punishment. I'm gonna be so nice, it's gonna hurt. I don't know. That's the wrong hard approach. I think the approach here is, honest and real generosity and kindness to your enemy, even if you don't feel it, even if you don't want it. It'll be so surprising. It will be so shocking. It may convict the other person of their wrongdoing. It may provoke a change of heart, but it also may not. It also may not. And that's where the real world meets the Proverbs, and that's where this proverb comes in. What is the real payoff here in this proverb? Is it, then your enemy will finally have a change of heart, they'll finally be a good person, and you'll both be on great terms forever? Well, the payoff is that the Lord will reward you. I don't know what that means. Is this a real life change that God brings in your heart and his heart so that you can have peace? Maybe this is actually like a real world reward that I feel. Or maybe it's something invisible and eternal that I'm never going to know about, and I just have to leave that up to God because the real reward just comes from him. And this is where God's economy is different. In God's economy, loving your enemy, is always an investment that's worth making. It always pays off. It's always meaningful, and it's never wasted, even if you don't see or feel the results of it ever. Why? Because in ways that we do not understand, and we may never understand, every small act of love, particularly towards our enemies, that is matching who God is like, that is matching what Jesus is like, and it is building the new creation. It is purposefully tearing down the walls that we use to separate each other. It is purposefully partnering with God to bring his kingdom. And it's embracing our role in the grand story of God reconciling all things, all people to himself. Conflict is the human story, but reconciliation is the biblical story. That's a story you find yourself in. That's the story you were called to live into. That's the story the Proverbs tell. It's the story we see most clearly lived out in Jesus, who truly matched God's character. And when we think of God's character, perhaps it feels abstract. Well, Jesus is not abstract. He's concrete. That's a life lived. I'll invite the communion servers to come up. Jesus shows us through his teachings and through his life how to deal with conflict, how to turn the other cheek, how to love your enemies. And today, he invites you to the table of communion. It's a table that brings peace. It's a table that unifies us. It's a table that brings lightness to our life. But it's also a table and an invitation that causes you to pause, and I mean this to each one of you specifically today, to pause and reflect. Where are you in conflict with others? And if for some reason you feel like you cannot come to this table unless you have worked on something in your heart, or asked God to help you, or actively sought out reconciliation with someone in your life, I think that is a fair thing to do. We don't come to the table lightly. We are to be reconciled with our brother and sister. I will give you a minute to pause, reflect on the conflict that you feel in your own life, especially if there's something raw that you need to, maybe there's something you need to do, maybe there's something you need to bring to God. I'll give you a minute now to reflect on that. We're told that Jesus himself is our peace because he took the conflict of the world upon himself to make it right. That's what this represents. On the night he was betrayed, Jesus took bread, he broke it, and he gave it to his disciples, saying, "Take, eat. Eat in remembrance of me." Maybe they didn't know what he meant at that time, but now we see it clearly. He took on conflict to help us with ours.